The single biggest risk facing South Africa right now is a lack of decisive leadership. We're going to, over the next couple of months, explore that with a group of key people in a limited video series here at UMSA. I want to introduce you, first of all, to Zuriel Naicker from the global professional services company Marsh. He is the MD Sales and Distribution. And I know, Zuriel, as you join us, going to have some key insights. Before we get to the whole notion of leadership, I want us to start with this. As we get to grips now with the second year of COVID-19, how would you describe the current risk profile in South Africa?
Thanks, Jeremy. Good to connect with you and the UMSA community once again. Well, it's no surprise that these are uncertain times that we're in. We remain in a heightened risk environment, and there's increased volatility until we have what has become the COVID situation under control. Our vaccination rollout will be key to reducing this, and I think there has been a lot of positive progress in this regard. But I think we can acknowledge that there's still a journey to go here. We also need to be aware of the structural issues that weigh in on potential growth and create or drive a heightened risk environment. Low productivity, human capital shortages, etc. And I think when one couples that with underinvestment in things like our infrastructure with regard to energy and transport and the aging of that infrastructure, there's a lot that one needs to consider. A number of these factors have been exacerbated as a result of the pandemic. So, what comes to mind is things like income inequality, unemployment, a high rate of poverty, which really have had a laser-like focus on them because the symptoms have really been brought to the surface as a result of the environment which we find ourselves in. So there is a lot that one needs to consider in terms of the current risk profile of SA Inc., as it were.
Are you, and just a quick follow-up to that, are you a little more optimistic now than you were had we been having this conversation 12 months ago?
Definitely. I think that as the months have progressed, and I think if we look back over the past year, yes, there is a degree of uncertainty. But I think if we look at the way in which most major governments have dealt with the uncertainty in their environments and the steps that have been put in place, how business has responded through our region and in the country in particular, and also how we as risk practitioners have responded and rose to the occasion with very specific solutions in order to help businesses better cope and equip themselves with the risks that are inherent in our environment. I think that one definitely does have an optimistic view in terms of where we're at, with a realistic lens in respect of what needs to be done.
And that realistic lens is absolutely critical. I want to link two words together now. One is uncertainty that you've used, and the other one is leadership. Now, you've read the report, you've engaged with the report, you were part of the report. Yep. Lack of decisive leadership in South Africa is listed as the single biggest risk facing the country. First of all, before we get to solutions, why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, Jeremy, I think much of this points to some hangover from the previous administration when it comes to SA Inc. I think that the lack of policy certainty and some of the more controversial or far-reaching policies do have downstream effects for CEOs and the C-suite more generally speaking. Policy certainty goes a long way in instilling business confidence, and subsequently, really leads to corporate executives making bigger bets on SA Inc. and investing in capital projects and infrastructure and so on. So it's not that people don't like change; it's that people don't like the uncertainty associated with change, or the uncertainty that change brings. When you look at COVID-19 in particular and the resultant impact of lockdown, we've seen that industry groups have really come together to begin lobbying around specific and certain topics. And I think that there is a lesson here that if we as leaders do have a sense of uncertainty, there's really a need to create a conversation and action around those elements to drive the changes. And we are seeing those changes and the implications of them come into play. And I think that one mustn't also forget the practical considerations, in our environment in the recent months. I think leaders have had a lot that they've been tackling. I think that the changing environment, in many instances, infrastructure was not necessarily in place to enable employees to function optimally, and that did have impact. People became parents, they became caregivers, and practically, as a result, our traditional ways of management and engagement had changed. But I think that we can all agree, looking back on the year and coming out, maybe perhaps not coming out, but getting to kind of where we are at the moment. Many of these have resulted in positive impacts in changing the way of work, in changing our perception, in driving a more action-orientated based focus with regard to leadership, and ensuring that our focus really shifts in respect of accountability and responsibility.
All right, so the way in which we work has changed. I like that phrase about us all becoming more action-orientated. As a result, in that seismic shift, because it is a seismic shift, what new risk thinking then should organizations, both in the public and the private sector, be embracing right now? What's the new risk philosophy, do you think?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I love watching the evolution of risk, on an annual basis, on a monthly basis, and if I look at where things are, I think there are really three key risks that big organizations should be looking at. The one I would highlight in particular is the environment, social, and governance risk. The second being business resilience, and third is that of human capital. ESG, or environmental, social, and governance, is on every executive's mind right now. During the height of the uncertainty around COVID-19, business resilience was a massive focus for many businesses in South Africa and globally. And as Marsh McLennan, we almost observed and had concerns around this shift in focus from sustainability discussions like climate change and the move to a green economy. And we were almost concerned that this move to a green economy would turn out somewhat of a brown economy, as it were, as a result of this short-termism. But I think as economies start to emerge from what has been the immediate crisis, we see everyone shifting back to actively seeking out opportunities to create a more sustainable future. So ESG is back, and I think the enthusiasm and support around creating sustainable business is key. And really the question is how within each of the businesses that we work within, or as a risk community that we consult with, is this happen? If I think about Marsh McLennan, we've committed in January to being carbon neutral by the end of the year, an ambitious target, and we're seeing many corporates across the world and in South Africa doing the same thing and taking tangible steps to change the way in which they do business to become more sustainable. I think that the factor around business resilience to chat about is also an important one, and we're seeing clients take stock of their business continuity management program and reflect on the lessons that were learned, an after action review, as it were. So what worked, what didn't work, and how can we ensure that we compound those learnings that we've experienced over the last year to ensure that we build back stronger. And then finally, the comment that I've made on human capital. This is a real and continual risk that I think we need to focus on, but the ability to attract and retain employees is becoming more difficult. Employees have options and easier access to understanding the employee value proposition. That value proposition for you and I and the teams which we work with has also changed over the last year. There's a race to reskill, to ensure that we remain relevant, can operate in this new world of working. Flexible working, where will that land? I know many companies a year ago took the stance that will be 100% flexible. I see many colleagues and team members across the world pining to get back into a collaborative working environment. So I think that those kind of three key areas are certainly something for us to focus on and take note of.
None of this will be achieved without data. And you talk about the importance of something called exposure analysis. Very briefly, what is it? How is it conducted? And then once you have mined the data, how do companies use that information?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the first and most important thing is quantify your exposure. We really need to ensure that we understand the rands and cents, and that is key in respect of exposure analysis. At Marsh McLennan, our approach is really to identify new and emerging risks, some of which we've discussed here. Importantly, also to quantify them. So determine the exposure and the financial value of that exposure. And that also gives some sort of an indication as to where one needs to invest in order to reduce that risk. What is the degree of materiality? Our power really is that we can determine the risks which are insurable and those which are uninsurable. So what can you do as a business to take advantage of externalities that can help you reduce and mitigate risk within your organization? And then I think the other way is to develop strategies to actively reduce the risk within your business. So what are those risk mitigation interventions, and how can we collaboratively as risk advisors work with businesses to pull together some of the best solutions and thinking in the space. So if you don't have access to a risk strategy and an insurance advisor, then ultimately it sits on the data that you have at your disposal as a company. To pool and identify trends, work with your executive team to develop scenarios, and then try to quantify what that up or downside could look like.
And just a final question then, all of this is predicated on risk professionals understanding, embracing, and utilizing technology to a much greater extent. And it also says that a new type of risk professional needs to emerge, one who is completely adept within all of those principles.
Yeah, I mean, you're certainly on point with that, Jeremy. The use of technology provides us with a unique opportunity in respect of risk management analysis. Unfortunately, for many businesses, the amount of data that still sits within spreadsheets on share drives is quite something. So for many of our clients, certainly, it is the first step is pulling that data together in an organized and structured way, such that it can be mined for trends. And it's a critical first step because there are so many technology solutions available in respect of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and really good opportunities for us to create a greater degree of automaticity in respect of our risk management analysis. But I think we're taking some great steps in business in organizing that data as a first step. And the point you raise in respect of new skills or new practitioners is key to helping us achieve that. We're certainly seeing a big focus on a few key areas, and I'll highlight two of them. The one is that of data scientists. So risk departments really are extracting great value from an increased focus on data and data management and having specialists in this field. And it's interesting that the dichotomy of the second one that I want to speak about is more around flexible thinkers. So business models are tending towards innovation across the board, and that's no different for the risk function. So the ability to learn and embrace change and be flexible to innovate within that change is key. Within Marsh McLennan, we talk about having a growth mindset and the ability to constantly flex that muscle and expand on using what you have to expand and add new and different thinking to. We're in such a unique space, Jeremy. Our conversations as risk professionals have been elevated to the highest levels within organizations and prioritized in light of recent global events. So there's great value for us to contribute in businesses in our region by making these few shifts and changes within our organizations.
And great value in your insights as well. Leadership in the risk sector, that's part one. And my thanks to Zuriel Naicker from Marsh McLennan.